Well, it's time to continue our series of teams that have been knocked out of the playoffs. And now that the conference finals have passed, the first team we're going to take a look at are the Saginaw Spirit and how they just fell short of their goal. I know for the Saginaw Spirit, they're not officially done as they're going to host the Memorial Cup in a couple of weeks' time, but their goal this season was to go in through the front door. They wanted to be OHL champions, not just the Memorial Cup host. So they just fell short of their goal, but they put on quite the performance this year. Of course, going all the way to the Western Conference Final and then losing to the London Knights in the end. But still, it's got to be a little disappointing for this hockey club as they had such a great lineup. The 2023-24 season, it did get off to a slow start. If we think back to October, November, they were 4-7-0-1. That was November 2nd is where the record was. And at that point, there were a lot of questions online about would the Canadian Hockey League change the host team, or what would they do if this team doesn't make the playoffs? And I said then at that point, it's a little early to be asking those questions. And as soon as that came about, the Saginaw Spirit would go on to put on a 10-game winning streak, and they didn't look back ever since. And also, I did a video at that point too, looking at the way the team was, and I was comparing them to other OHL Memorial Cup hosts, because typically when you host the Memorial Cup, you do see a team that is very strong. They're usually at the top of the standings throughout, but Saginaw kind of looked familiar to the Guelph Storm of 2002, having that slow start and then picking up the pace, and that's exactly what the Saginaw Spirit did. However, in 2002, that Guelph Storm team, they only finished fourth in the Western Conference standings and then were eliminated in the second round by the Windsor Spitfires. So Saginaw, in the end, they did finish the year better than that Guelph Storm team in 2002. But still, it took a little, I think, for the chemistry and just to figure things out with this team going forward. And Dave Drinkle, the general manager of the Saginaw Spirit, he did say that he was going to go all in because this is a team that wanted to be strong. They wanted to have the best team possible on the ice night in, night out. And that saw several key trades. They started off the year picking up Braden Hache from the Barrie Colts, who would eventually become the captain of the Saginaw Spirit team. And then they picked up Alex Christopoulos and Rodwin Donizio from Windsor, Ethan Hay from Flint. At the trade deadline, Owen Beck from Peterborough and Jorian Donovan from Brantford. So Dave Drinkle doing the best he could to make this team have the best shot it could to win the Ontario Hockey League Championship, something that this team has not yet done in franchise history. Saginaw has not yet made an appearance at the OHL final since moving from North Bay. When they were the Centennials, they had that run to the OHL Championship, but as Saginaw, still looking for that first OHL title. But they did have a back and forth battle all year long with the Sioux Greyhounds. It was actually quite exciting to watch as those two teams went toe to toe during the regular season. Saginaw, they would eventually win the West Division, end up as the second seed in that very tough competitive Western Conference. In the playoffs, they ended up sweeping the Owen Sound Attack in the first round. They had a 7-game classic against Sault Ste. Marie in the second round, and then in the end lost to the London Knights in 6 games. Usually in these videos, I look at the regular season stats, but let's look at the playoff performers for the Saginaw team. The top 10 scorers for the playoffs. Rodwin Donizio led the way, 5 goals, 12 assists, good for 17 points. Callum Mangoni had a great series there against the Sioux Greyhounds. He ended up with 7 goals, 7 assists, 14 points. Owen Beck, third in team scoring in the playoffs, 4 goals, 10 assists, 14 points. Hunter Haight, the former Barrie Colts, he entered the playoffs with 9 goals, 4 assists, 13 points. Josh Bloom, who was a late addition. You'll remember the Vancouver Canucks announced that Bloom would be sent back to junior, and he signed with the Saginaw Spirit, the former Spirit captain coming back. Ended up in the playoffs with 4 goals, 7 assists, good for 11 points. Michael Misa also had 4 goals, 7 assists, 11 points in the playoffs. Joey Willis, 4 goals, 7 assists, 11 points. A bit of a theme there for those 3 players. And then Zane Parekh, who had an outstanding regular season offensively, kind of cooled off a bit in the playoffs. I think he was kind of focusing a little more on the defensive side. He ended the playoffs with 2 goals, 9 assists, 11 points. Then you had Jorian Donovan, 9th in scoring with 3 goals, 6 assists, 9 points. And Mateusz Sapovalev, he had 3 goals, 6 assists, good for 9 points. In the playoffs, the goaltending became a bit of a question mark because Andrew Oak, he got injured in that Sault Ste. Marie series. He had a record of 5-0 in the playoffs, a 1.83 goals against average, which was outstanding. Also a 938 save percentage, but he got injured in game 2 of the playoffs against the Sioux Greyhounds, and Nolan Lalonde had to come in. Lalonde ended up with a record of 5-7, a 2.79 goals against, and an 893 save percentage. So Lalonde did everything he could to keep the Saginaw Spirit competitive in the postseason, and was right there up until the end against the London Knights in that Western Conference final. It's going to be interesting to see once we get to the Memorial Cup, will Andrew Oak be healthy enough for Saginaw as they look to win their first ever Memorial Cup championship, or will Nolan Lalonde again have to carry the load? So that's how the playoffs played out for the Saginaw Spirit team. When you look at the overagers who are graduating this season, Josh Bloom, Alex Christopoulos, and Braden Hache all leaving the team, all three contributing quite well during the regular season and in the playoffs. But it's the overage candidates going into next year. It's a long list. So let's take a look at who's eligible to be an overager next year for the Saginaw Spirit. It starts with Callum Mangoni. Then you have Mateus Sapovlev, but he's also a Vegas Golden Knights prospect and an import. I think it's unlikely that he comes back next year for Saginaw. Hunter Haight, the Minnesota Wild prospect, does he come back or can he stick around with the Wild? Owen Beck, a Montreal Canadiens prospect. It's probably unlikely he comes back to Saginaw next year. Aiden Castle, PJ Forgoni, Jorian Donovan, he's an Ottawa Senators prospect. Does he come back? Rodwin Denizio, an import and an Anaheim Ducks prospect. I think it's unlikely he comes back. And then the goaltenders, Andrew Oak and Nolan Lalonde, both eligible to return next season as overagers. And you have to figure Saginaw will pick one or the other going into next season. But some very tough choices because there's 10 overage candidates that are possible for Saginaw. So that means a lot of turnover going into next year. So the Saginaw Spirit team is going to take a step back, as that's usually what happens when you are hosting the Memorial Cup or you're ready to go on a deep run in the playoffs. You go all in. It's not unusual to see teams do this, and then the high turnover, and then next season is a rebuild. That's what we saw this year, even with the Peterborough Petes after they won the OHL championship last year. Yes, they had that great start to the regular season, but they did fall off, and then they traded away those veteran players for young assets and draft picks. So I would expect to see that happening with the Saginaw Spirit as well. And what's really interesting, this was mentioned a few times now, is that the last time an OHL or a Memorial Cup host won their league championship, you have to go all the way back to 2008 when the Kitchener Rangers won the OHL championship as Memorial Cup hosts. So the Saginaw Spirit, they put in a fantastic effort this season. They ended up falling short, but they got to the Western Conference final, which says a lot considering the talent they had to go up against in the playoffs with Owen Sound, Sault Ste. Marie, and then the London Knights. Now, the big question that I have going into next season is Michael Misa. Do they consider trading him? That's a big question, a big if, because Michael Misa, of course, was granted exceptional status, expected to be a high draft pick at the NHL level. But with this team needing to recoup assets after this year's run, you have to figure a trade involving Michael Misa would probably help restock the cupboards. You'd get some young players. You'd also get some big draft picks. It's kind of comparable to when the Oshawa Generals traded John Tavares to the London Knights back in 2009. When we look back at that trade, Oshawa traded Tavares, Michael Del Zotto, and Daryl Borden to the London Knights for Christian Thomas, Scott Valentine, Michael Zador, 4 second-round draft picks, and 2 third-round picks. So that is what the John Tavares trade resulted in for Oshawa. And Christian Thomas and Scott Valentine both had great careers as members of the Oshawa Generals post-trade. So is it too early to start the speculation of the Misa brothers being reunited with the Steelheads? I haven't heard anything officially yet, but if you just look at the connections with the Misa brothers, could they play together next year? Does Saginaw really want to trade away a player like Michael Misa? Because he's got some great talent, and it's going to be exciting to see what he's capable of at the upcoming Memorial Cup. So I do feel with the way the roster is right now, Saginaw should compete for a playoff spot next season. But if they do decide to rebuild, kind of like we saw Peterborough this year, then this team could miss the playoffs, but then get a great draft pick in 2025. So time will tell. That's how I see it from the booth. Let me know in the comments section down below your thoughts on the Saginaw Spirit going forward. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you again soon.